So most beginners, and honestly maybe even a lot of intermediate editors as well, are making one huge mistake with Resolve and they don't even know that it's happening. So Resolve stores all of your projects inside something called a project library. And by default, that library sits on your system drive, which means that if that drive fails, or even if you reinstall your operating system, you're going to lose your projects, all of them. And today, I want to show you how to set up Resolve correctly, how to move your existing projects, and how to make sure that you never lose your work again. Let's jump in. So a project library, what used to be called a database, is basically Resolve's memory bank. It stores your projects, it stores your timelines, your metadata, your markers, all the little decisions that make up your edit, make up your project. It doesn't store your media, but it stores everything about how Resolve thinks about that media. So think of the project library as the brains of your entire workflow. And like any brain, you don't want it living on the most fragile part of your computer, your system drive. So when you first install Resolve, it creates something called a local database. This lives directly on your system drive. That's your C drive on a Windows machine, Macintosh HD on a Mac, and that drive will be the first thing to fail. It's the drive that gets wiped when you reset or format your system. It's the drive that gets corrupted if your operating system crashes as well. And it's the one place you shouldn't be storing any creative work long term. I've had students lose entire semesters worth of projects because everything lived in that default database. Please don't let that be you. So here's what you should be doing. First, use a secondary drive, either a second internal SSD or a fast external SSD. Second, store your project library on that drive. Third, ideally, keep your project media on the same drive or another dedicated media drive. And fourth, avoid putting your library on the system drive at all costs. This is going to keep your project safe, portable, and way easier to back up. Okay, let me show you how to set it up. So most people kind of miss this. You don't need to be inside a project or inside the software to see the project manager. Resolve is going to show you the project manager on launch, and that's this window right here. Okay, so this is the project manager. If you're not seeing your project libraries, which is the left part of the window here, there's a little button on the top left here that essentially opens up the libraries and closes them down. Okay, you can also see at the top left here, there are kind of sections for local project libraries, so libraries that are local on your machine. There's a network section as well, maybe if you had a NAS or a network attached storage. And then there's a section for cloud, and that's if you had a Blackmagic cloud account and you kept projects in the cloud. This video is going to focus on local project libraries, and that's why we selected local. Okay, and by default, you can see that here is the local database, and this is housed, if we go to the details here, it's housed on our C drive, on our system drive, and we don't want that, as I said earlier on in the tutorial, because if your computer crashes or you format your machine or something happens, you're going to lose all of your projects. Okay, so what we're going to need to do first is we're going to need to create a new project library. So we're going to go down here to Add Project Library. And what you'll see when the Add Project Library window pops up is that you have a section called Create and a section called Connect. So create is if you're essentially creating the project library for the first time, and connect is if you need to reconnect to a project library. And I'll explain connect in a little bit as well. So we're going to select create here. We're going to give this a name. So I'm going to call this that media prof. Let's just move my mouse over. Project library. And then I'm going to browse and I'm going to navigate. You'll see that I have my Windows drive, but I also have a projects drive here, and that's an internal SSD that I have in my machine. So I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to go to, I think I created a folder for Resolve Project Library Tests, and in there, I've got my That Media Prof project library folder. I'm going to select that. I'm going to select, and then what you can do is you can say create, and you'll see that it creates that project library here on the left, and we are now working within that project library because it's outlined here. As I said before, we never want to work in this local database, and what I normally do and what I tell my students to do as well is I normally select that, I right click and I say remove, and then I disconnect it. I'm not going to do that right now, but I would recommend, as long as there's no projects within that local database, you can disconnect it, but I'm going to also show you how you can move your projects across in a minute as well. But you can disconnect it, and then you've got no chance of mistakenly creating projects inside that local database anymore. Okay, so I'm going to select that MediaProf project library, and I'm actually going to connect another project library of mine that's on this computer, and I want to show you how you can move projects over hypothetically from your local database if you've already been working in that kind of default project library, that local database. I'll show you how you can move your projects over from there to your newly created project library. And you can call your project library whatever it is you want to call it. Students in the program that I teach in, we have kind of like a default file name spec that we use. It's always first initial, last name, project library. First initial, last name is always lowercase, project library is always uppercase, and it's all one word. And I'm actually going to connect my library that is named in that way now, and I'm going to show you how you can then hypothetically move projects across from one library to another. So I'm going to go down here to add project library, but instead of create, I'm going to go to connect, and this is how you can reconnect an existing project library that you have. Students that I teach, they all have access to an Avid Nexus server on campus, and they all have a workspace in that server, and it's accessible from any of our edit suites in the areas that our students can edit. And essentially, if you've already created your project library on one machine and you actually want to pick it up on another machine, instead of going to create now, you're going to go to connect, and I'm going to type in my name, lowercase, and then project library, uppercase. I'm going to browse and I'm going to find that on my projects drive. So let's go to G Wenzel project library, select that folder. You never double click and go into the folder, you just single click and select that folder. And now I'm going to connect, and you'll see that it's connecting to that library, and I've got a whole lot of different projects in here. I've got folders that house different projects. It's maybe not as organized as it could be, but it's got a whole lot of projects in, and that's how you would connect to an already existing project library. So I just want to quickly show you how you could export existing projects first from, an existing library to a new library. So just hypothetically, maybe these projects were on your local database and you want to move them over to your newly created database. So I'm just going to use this top one, and let's say that I want to use this project right here. What you can do is you can right click and you can say export project. And what I'm going to do is let's go to our project drive. Let's go to Resolve Project Library Tests. I'm actually just going to create a new folder in here. I'm going to call it Exported Project. Okay. And I'm going to save that in there, and it's saving a .drp or a DaVinci Resolve project file. Okay, so I've exported that. Now I'm going to move over to that MediaProf project library, the one that I newly created. I'm going to right click here. I'm going to say import project, and you can see it's navigated to where I just saved that. So it's Resolve Project Library Tests, exported project. And if I select that project file and I say open, it's going to show up here, and then I could double click and open the project and go into that project. Okay, I'm going to just actually delete this for now, because now I want to show you how you could back up an entire library and move it across. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to go back to my G Wenzel project library. Okay, so hypothetically, let's just say that this G Wenzel project library is my local database, and I need to move my projects across from local database. So what you would do is you would go to the details section here next to the library, and you'd go here to backup. And then what it's going to do is it's going to ask you where you want to save it. So I'm going to go to that folder that I created. Let's actually just create another folder. We'll call this library backup. Go in there, and I'm going to hit save. And then it's asking you, do you want to back up the project library? This operation might take some time depending on the size of your project library. So if you've got quite a few projects in there, it might take a little bit of time to do that, but I'm going to click backup. And then it says project library backed up successfully. I'm going to say okay. So now if you want to restore that library, what you have to do is go up to this top button here called restore. Click on that. You navigate to the project library backup. Here it is. You say open, and then it's going to bring up the same add project library window. So what we need to do here is we actually have to create a new project library for this library that we want to import. We can't actually restore the whole library to the new library we've created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just call this that media prof project library, and I'll just put a 2 at the end. I'm going to browse. I'm going to go here. What I'm going to do is just create a new folder, that media prof project library 2. I'm going to select that folder, and then I'm going to say create. And I know we've already created a new project library, but this is unfortunately just one of those things. It's just another step in the process. So I'm going to say create, and it's going to say this operation might take some time depending on the size of your project library. I'm going to say restore. It says restore successful. It has been restored. And if we go in here, you'll see all of those projects and the folders that I had to sort things are now in that project library. One last thing I actually just want to quickly show you how to do is just how to work with project archives. So a project archive is essentially a folder containing your DaVinci Resolve project file, as well as all of the media and anything else associated with the project. So a DaVinci Resolve project archive is a great way to move your project around if you need to. So what I'm going to do here is, let's just use this bar sequence again. I'm going to right click on that project, and I'm going to say export project archive over here, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and find on my secondary drive, I'm going to go to this library tests here. I'm going to just go here. I'm going to call this bar sequence just so I know what it is. It's always a really good idea to kind of name and organize your stuff so it's much easier to find. I'm going to select that folder. I'm going to say save, and then it's going to say archive 2. That's where we've kind of browsed to now. And you've got a few different options. I would always recommend to take all of your media files. You can take your render cache as well. I don't have any proxy media associated with this project, but if you did, you could select that as well. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to say okay, and you'll see that it's copying the media across, and now that project archive has been created. And then if you wanted to import that project archive into your new project library, if I select the one that I don't have anything in right now, right click, and I say restore project archive. And then if you see, I'm inside that folder that I created, and there's the bar sequence. You actually have to just single click on this .dra folder. You need the whole folder, and then you say open. And what it does is it imports the project, but it also kind of relinks all of the media, and then there is the project as well. And while you're setting things up, you might want to create multiple libraries. You know, perhaps you want to create one for client work. You want to create one for YouTube projects, maybe one for personal projects. If you're a student in the program that I teach in, maybe you want to create one for your university coursework. And then maybe you also want to have a project library as an archive library as well. This keeps things tidy. It also reduces the risk of project library corruption because, you know, each one holds fewer projects. So now that your library is living in the right place, you want to back it up regularly. You can export individual projects. You can back up the entire library. You can sync backups to Google Drive or OneDrive, or you can store a copy on a network attached storage or a NAS. You know, this gives you 2 layers of protection, your external SSD and the cloud. And that's it. Your Resolve setup is now safe, it's organized, and it's future-proof. You're never going to lose anything again because you put your trust in that default project library. If you found this video helpful, give it a like, subscribe, and perhaps you'd like to check out this other Resolve tutorial linked up here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you there.